Thanks. I'm ready.
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to the Industrial Problem Seminar. It's a great pleasure to introduce Patrick Delaney, and he's a software engineer at BloomBoard, and he's going to talk about open source language models.
All right, thank you, everybody. Thanks for being here. So I wanted to start off, I guess we have people who are watching this presentation remotely, and then we have folks in the room here. I wanted to start off with just kind of getting a gauge of the room and figure out who I'm speaking to and what you guys are interested in first, and then kind of dive into this. So anybody who's watching remotely, sorry, I won't be able to poll you, but we'll just use this as a sample size here to start off with. So I guess first thing I wanted to ask is, and I'll tell people who are watching remotely or in the future what I'm seeing here, but what level, I guess the first one is what level of schooling or education are most of you in? How many are undergrad level? Raise your hand. Oh, okay, none, zero, we see zero. And then, okay, except for one guy, but you're professional, you're past school. And then we have, and then how many are like master's degree students? Okay, so we have 2 out of the, how many people we have here, like 15 or so. And then how many are PhD students? Okay, pretty much the rest. And then how many are after school? They're in the professional world. 2, right? 2, 3 over here, these guys. Okay, and then, okay, so the next question is, well, it was kind of more about like entering the workforce, like when are you entering the workforce? And so these 3, they already did that. You might have been in the workforce before, but like if you're a student and you're looking at it entering the workforce at some point in the future, how many people are like entering now, like this year? Okay, how many next year? 2. How many 3 to 5 years out? More. Probably the rest. And then how many never? 0. Okay. So it seemed to be like a few, like 2 or 3 next year, and then a few like, and then the rest is kind of like more 3 to 5 years out. I just wanted to get an idea so I can kind of tailor some of the things I say here. And then my last question would be about career versus life, career and life discussion. Like I could talk about a lot of different things, and we had a meeting before this with Gilad and some other students, just trying to figure out what might be the most interesting. Just kind of generally, would it be more interesting for you guys to hear about open source language models specifically, or would you be more interested in hearing about career advice in general? Not necessarily knowing who I am and where I come from, but like, what are you looking for in this in the industrial seminar when you go to it? Do you want to hear about the topic, or do you want to hear about the person, or is it like a 50-50 thing? How many people want to hear about the topic? How many people really want to hear about open source language models? Oh, okay, most people. And then how many people want to hear just about the person and just about like the career, your career life path? Nobody. And then anybody more like 50-50, you want to hear a mix of both? We're like, okay, so we kind of have like maybe 50-50, but slanted more on open source language models is kind of what I'm getting. It's like 60% open source language models. Okay, great. So thank you for that. So I'm going to start in, I guess, since it's like mostly open source language models, I'm just going to give my presentation on open source language models, and it's very related to what I do in my work. Like this is a serious, I didn't just make this up. This is what I work on every day as a DevOps software developer. But I also want to circle back and talk a little bit about my personal life and my career. And then, but I also want to encourage people when when we get towards the end to ask questions and really challenge me. I'm actually not that great at math. I understand a lot of you are very extremely good at math. So I have some mathematical stuff I put at the end, but it's kind of more like a straw man throwaway thing. So you can talk about that, or my life, or open source language models. And then as an incentive, we're going to have a little marketplace. The top 3 questions as judged by me will get a sheet of prank stickers because we have April Fools coming up. These are very valuable because April Fools is just around the corner. We have motion activated stickers, voice activated stickers, and clap activated stickers. So you can put these on non-smart appliances around your house or apartment. You can put it on your microwave or something. Say like, yeah, it's voice activated. Go ahead. You can try that as a joke. So whoever asked the best question, and sorry anybody connecting in virtually, I can't give you these, but in this room, the top 3 questions will get sheets there. Okay. So keep that in mind. Please ask challenging, good questions. You might get a sheet. All right. So, okay. So open source language models. So first off, how many of you have not heard of ChatGPT? No one. Perfect. Exactly. Everybody knows about chatbots and ChatGPT and Gemini. You know, maybe Bard was Google's offering. Now it's Gemini. It's been pretty big. It's been in the newspapers. How many of you are familiar with the concept of open source software? Okay, so most people so what open source software is, you know, closed source is like it's owned by a company, and it's typically not public. You can't see it. It's just software that's running on a machine, and it's private. Open source, there's different kinds of licenses that are basically you attach it to the software, and you are basically giving the world permission to use that software however they want. And there's different kinds of open source licenses. There's some that say without restriction, you can use it however you want. You can make money off of it. There's ones that say with attribution, you have to say thank you to us. There's different levels. But I think what I wanted to get at here, for those who are not familiar, is open source language models would be a model, would be the thing that's kind of behind ChatGPT. They have a model, and you go in there and you type in, you know, I like bananas. Where do bananas come from? And it gives you an answer. They have a closed source model, a gigantic, big, let's just call it it's just a file, really is the best analogy. It's just a file that you are querying against, and then it's giving you an answer. And that's the very simplistic model of what's going on. But that file is private. They're not going to give you that file. That took millions of dollars to train, maybe even tens of millions of dollars. It's not really clear. And they're always constantly updating it, changing it. Open source, you can download the model. You can actually download the model and use it yourself. And there's lots of different sizes of open source language models. There's ones that are the size of a language model gets measured by the number of parameters. And a parameter is just let's not even go through the math. Let's not even go really deep into it. It's just the amount of, you know, it's kind of like the amount of gigs in that model, right? It's just it's a giant file, right? How many gigs is that file? And the bigger, usually the better, or the more refined it is, the better. So you can use open source language models that are maybe a gig or half a gig or even smaller if they're, you know, older or just designed to be small. Or you can use ones that are, you know, many hundreds of gigs and almost as good as ChatGPT or Gemini by the kind of standard metrics used in the industry. So my first thing I wanted to talk about today is just what an open source language model is versus, you know, closed source that's being used by Google or the big ones, you know, Bing and so on, versus what is an open source model. And then kind of talk about you're here to hear about industrial problems, and you're here to maybe think about your career and where you're going to go with your career and what might be a good bet for your career. I wanted to kind of bring this to your attention that open source language models might become a thing. I certainly have staked a lot of my career over the last few years on them versus just using ChatGPT as an API versus being able to learn how to use an open source model how to deploy it, and then why it might be a good career bet. Not only for if you're going to go off to Silicon Valley or some other city, but also here for the Twin Cities. So, okay, so we talked a little bit about what it is, the why. I kind of wrote this from the standpoint of more from Minnesota or the Midwest or just the middle of the country, like not Silicon Valley. Why might a company or organization use an open source language model if it's only, let's say, 70% as good as ChatGPT or the best of the best out there, right? You might say, well, that's stupid. Why would anybody use not the best? Well, sometimes they absolutely can't for different reasons. Governance would be almost like a political or internal political issue. If you're talking about Target or Best Buy, they might have a huge amount of super valuable data about their customers. They don't want to give that to ChatGPT or OpenAI or Microsoft. And that might be a political issue. And you might think, well, there can be contractual agreements, like they can be adults and they can trust each other to do that. But really, there are massive battles that happen between these companies that might be far above our pay grade, that executives worry about. And there's stories I've heard about Minnesota companies like Honeywell battling with Amazon over the creation of the Amazon Alexa and some of the data that was used to allow Alexa to recognize voice back. This is over 10 years ago. There's a huge amount of very brutal battles that go on sometimes. And so governance is a real thing. Security, if it's something like healthcare, has anybody heard of HIPAA for healthcare data? Yeah, it's like a law that you can't just move healthcare data around willy-nilly in the United States. There's laws that govern that. It's the Healthcare something Portability Act. So if it's a healthcare application, and that's really big in this, so it's huge. So if there's a healthcare chatbot, I don't know. Maybe I don't know enough about what I'm talking about. It just doesn't seem like you could just throw that onto ChatGPT if people are going to be entering healthcare information into it, right? Intellectual property is something where, like, if you're an engineering company or a company trying to actually create something, there might be less of a strong argument for this, but sometimes companies just want to create IP. They just say, we want this IP to be our IP. We want to create stuff that we either own that is private or is special somehow or trademarked, and we put our own name on it. And we don't want some Wizard of Oz ChatGPT in the background that we're dependent on, even though it might be cheaper to use them, especially at the onset. We don't want that. We want to create IP. Another one might be scalability. So again, this is maybe I have less of an argument for this, but there might be certain situations where just buying your own server and running your own model, if it's a simple enough use case, might be actually cheaper than using the ChatGPT API. I don't know that. I don't have a good example, but it could happen, right? If it's free, effectively, if you own the equipment, or if you get some kind of grant for some equipment, it's just sitting there. It's effectively free to just ping that equipment versus every time you make an API call, you have to pay this company something. There might be an argument for that. And then also custom requirements, right? Software is just weird. Sometimes there's just weird stuff that happens. So there might be weird things that we don't know about. So if you're kind of jiving with me here on some of my arguments for why open source language models might be an important thing for a future career that you might find yourself at, this is sort of my non-mathematical way of describing what I think is probably going to be a common pattern. This is just my opinion. This is not supposed to be a set rule, but I have built my own chatbot. I first built one in 2020, just using GPT-2, and I built it using Flask, which is a kind of like a Python server, and GPT-2. You know, download the file. It was really crude. It didn't give really great results, but basically what I found is, and that's from The Simpsons. That character's from The Simpsons. If anybody saw that, if anybody remember that episode where Lisa built a robot called Linguo, and then the robot kind of went off the rails and stuff. Check it out, the Simpsons episode where Lisa made a chat bot or a robot. So that was the Lingo bot. You could sign in, and then you could create documents. So this is like the name of the document, and then this was the query that you would put in, just like you would query ChatGPT, and then it would give you an output. So you can see some of the, I'll read some of the outputs here because it was pretty poor quality. It was kind of funny. So one question I put in there was, how do I bottle feed an infant? And then it answered back, a bottle feeder can be used to feed an infant. It can also be used to bottle feed an adult. How do I feed a baby? Bottle feeders are used to feed a baby, but they can also bottle feed a baby. What is a bottle feeder? An infant bottle feeder is a device that is used to feed an infant. It just kind of repeats itself. It says nonsensical things, right? But because it was a smaller bottle, right? It wasn't ChatGPT with how many billions of parameters, we don't know exactly. Yeah, but I built this, I swear, I built it. I have the code online. You can try to use it if you want to. It's on my GitHub. But oh yeah, so there I got an example. Like who would win in a fight, a tiger or a lion? I don't know. I don't even know what to say. I'm not gonna say anything. You just say what I think is right, blah blah blah. So anyway, you get these weird outputs, right? So then what do you do if you have a weird output? You have to retrain the model somehow so that it doesn't give such weird off the rail outputs. And I don't know, because I never went that far to go into, training GPT-2, not ChatGPT. GPT-2 is the model. I didn't go through and like train it on tigers or bottle feeding or whatever. I just kind of thought it was cool to make the thing spit out outputs. But I know that if you wanted to, you could potentially, refine it. So you have to refine it with better inputs, right? So if you refine it with better inputs, well, what does that mean? Well, that means you probably need some way of tagging what a better input is for the particular use case. Okay, so that means if you're going to tag it, you probably need some way to have a human look at the input. You might be able to generate the input with another chatbot bot, with like an agent, or you might be able to scrape it off the web, or you might be able to just write it all yourself. What I've heard anecdotally is typically you need something like 3,000 different kinds of lines of inputs to really make a decent dent in an error, but that might really depend on what you're doing. But at some point, you're gonna have to have a person look over your inputs and tell you, like, is this a good input or not? Which means we're gonna have to build some kind of a GUI, right? Well, you don't have to. You could have the data scientists do all that work, right? But there's only so many data scientists, so you probably need a GUI to have some kind of mass way of telling us what is good and what is bad output. That's why when you go on ChatGPT, there's a thumbs up and thumbs down. They are basically taking your input, if you thumbs up or thumbs down it, to help refine and fine tune or pre-train their model. It's called reinforcement learning from human feedback. So this whole like process I ran into years ago, and long story short, we're doing the same thing. We're kind of running into the same thing at my work today. I won't go into detail about what that involves, but we are. And it's probably, and my contention, it's probably many companies are running into the same problem. Okay, that's my thought. So this is an additional. This is just some additional thoughts behind why is customization of a large language model important in general, not just open source language models, but the closed source big companies as well. This is just me kind of forecasting things and just presenting more information about why this might be a real thing. In May of 2023, there was a leaked document this was talked about on the semi-analysis Substack, where somebody at Google said, you know, we're screwed because of open language models, right? We don't really have any moat for this. We have no way of preventing in the far future anybody from just coming up with their own language models, and so you know, we're screwed. So that was, so you can look that up. I also noticed in about May 2023, OpenAI through ChatGPT had plugins, was their big release, where a plugin is basically, you go on to like the kayak.com plugin and you search something like, yeah, I'd like to figure out a flight to blah, blah, blah. And then it would give you a response with that plugin, almost in like a structured JSON format that's from that vendor. And they just had tons and tons and tons of these plugins, kayaks right there. You know, that evolved over the year. And then in November last year, they came out with this thing called custom GPTs, which is like, you go, if you're, I'm not sure if this is, if they allow this in GPT-3, just regular free OpenAI, but if you subscribe, you can go in there and you can create your own custom GPT by, really it has you describe very lightly how you want it to give outputs. But I think you can go in there and you can actually do some fine tuning as well. So I just noticed that, you know, moving from this plugin, like, hey, look, this is what all of these vendors want, to, you know, pivoting from that to, here's what the people actually need. Here's what the users of this stuff actually probably need. People are interested in things like writing and productivity and analysis and programming and education and relationships, and they're interested in human things. They're not interested in, as much as you might want to sell people flights, kayak, like that's not as good of an interface as being able to, you know, really customize this human-like, you know, robot that I'm talking to. So that was another shift I noticed last year. Okay, so I don't want to get too much into the details. So I'll try to gloss over some things here, but you know, just so we can kind of move along. But like, let's say you wanted to use, it's good. It's all well and good to talk about and get you hyped up about open LLMs. If you actually want to use an LLM, well, how many of you are familiar with Hugging Face or heard of Hugging Face before? About maybe half or a little bit fewer. Hugging Face is sort of an API wrapper for a lot of different AI stuff. There's all sorts of libraries that allow you to do image recognition, you know, large language models, all sorts of kind of AI stuff. And so if you go to Hugging Face and you search for this, I have this link here, but you go to the Open LLM leaderboard, essentially, or just Google the Open LLM leaderboard, it's going to look like this. And this is this big overwhelming interface. What you want to do is try to narrow down a language model. You could narrow it down based upon its performance. Leaderboard metrics are sort of like how it's like a list of questions that gets asked to the large language models and then evaluated whether the large language model gave a correct response. It's like a ratio of correct response to total questions. And things get ranked based on all these different kinds of sets of questions. So you can start there, but then you'll probably notice that a lot of the top ones are going to be pretty large. They're going to be multiple billion, like tens of billions of parameters. So you might be restricted in what you can actually use. You might need to do what I did a few years ago and use something small, something like a billion parameters or less that you could fit on your laptop. But you could go on that leaderboard and just kind of select something. There's also categories for whether the model is either already been fine-tuned by someone else or not. That's kind of what this is here. And then there's instruction-based language models. You want to use something that's probably pre-trained or fine-tuned to play around with or to train it yourself. And then the precision is like the encoding precision. It's like how would I say this? Like usually let's put it this way. Float 16 is kind of the default. And if you go into things like 8-bit and 4-bit, it's like your output is going to be probably lower quality because there's stuff getting compressed under the surface there. I won't go into too much detail there. And then there's the size, like how many parameters. Usually the bigger parameters, like usually the larger, the higher quality. So knowing that more parameters usually means higher quality. There's this thing called quantization. If you're training a language model, you're using a GPU, right? There in about 2010, we started to figure out how to use GPUs for AI. So you put GPUs are basically like memory. They're kind of like RAM. So you can parallelize all of these tasks on GPUs through these Python libraries. So you can just do things in parallel rather than just one stream. And but GPUs are pretty expensive right now. This is a snapshot of NVIDIA's stock price and how much it's gone up because there's just a crazy demand for GPUs right now. So you might not be able to get a hold of a good GPU. So you have this high compute load. That's a frying an egg on a GPU picture. You're doing this, it's just a high kind load. And then there's all these services out there, and you guys might be able to prove me wrong on this, but I think a lot of the services out there kind of suck, like Colab, because at least when I use Colab, it would kind of disconnect. And so you might want to just use a machine and then quantize your training process so that it doesn't take up so many resources, so you can use your crappy little GPU that you have at home to do an experiment. So just what I figured out through my experiments, if you're using like a 6 gigabyte language model, which this was, I think, 1 billion parameters, if I remember correctly. I'd have to go, see here. Yeah, this is a 1 billion parameter model, which was about 6 gigabytes. And by quantizing it with something called QLoRa, I was able to almost half that, the amount of memory required to load that model. And then you can do a bunch of training. So look into, this is beyond the scope to really go walk you through how to do all this, but look into quantization as a way to make training easier if you don't have as much powerful equipment. Yeah, I probably went into too much detail here, but I guess my job is DevOps. So I have a lot to do with like actually getting the stuff up and going. And I've done it as a hobby on my own machine, and I've done it at work. And basically it's especially if you're using older GPUs, it's a huge headache to get it working. And this was kind of like describing the stuff that needs to be in place and what it really is on the hardware level to get something working. Yeah, I don't want to go into too many details, but there's different parts of the stack that all have to be kind of aligned. And if you can figure out a way to kind of hack that and just get a package to avoid dealing with this, I would encourage that. Let's put it that way. And then same with the environment levels. There's like the hardware, there's a bunch of like hardware and firmware stuff, and then there's the environment. There's a bunch of environmental stuff that need to happen. If you're running like a Jupyter notebook and you want it to have access, are people familiar with Jupyter? Yeah, pretty much everybody's saying yeah to that one. Like you're running this data science like IDE for Python, Jupyter, that's kind of like Google Colab, and you want it to touch the GPU. You just have to make sure you're using the right like libraries, and then you need to make sure you can verify that it is actually in fact using the GPU. And there's a bunch of this software stuff that has to happen. And all in all, this is like a lot of work. And professionally, it's better to just, if you can, just use an existing stack that kind of figures that all out for you, where you get the hardware and then the hardware vendor gives you all the software stack, because it's a huge amount of work. If you're doing it personally, just good luck. It's just going to take a lot. I mean, I did it. I've done it, and it's just a lot of late nights programming, I guess. Snafus and things to think about. Yeah. So when you're training a large language model, There's a couple different ways to do it. There's a pipeline way, which is like easy mode, is using pipeline. And then there's the real way, if you're gonna do quantization and get into more advanced stuff, you should not use pipeline. Yeah, there's just lots of buttons and things that you can tweak and change as you're going through this. I recommend actually using ChatGPT or Gemini to teach you how to do certain things that you're not familiar with. Like just have the chatbot walk you through some of the coding and some of the troubleshooting, right? Not saying you should not try to learn, but try to use these large language models to coach you through some of it, especially if you're doing it on your own. There's a lot of value in that. I think I would pair ChatGPT and these closed source language models with books or tutorials. That's kind of how I've been able to figure it out. Maybe a lot of you are already doing that with some of your programming and stuff. I didn't really get to finish this slide here. This was kind of talking about getting results and how just the importance of a GUI that I mentioned earlier. So, it's all the crazy programming DevOps stuff needs to happen, but if you're doing it, eventually you're going to have to refine this data, right, and fine tune your model to have a specific application. So you're probably going to need a GUI. You could start off on your own as like a student project. You could do your own and refine your own data, collect your own data, but you probably need a GUI of some kind to go through and check yes or no on different kinds of outputs. Moving theory to useful code. What was I trying to say here? Okay. So let's say if you're more of like a data scientist, you probably are mostly working in Jupyter or Colab, this kind of IDE environment. But what you're ultimately trying to do is you don't want to just run in that environment forever. You want to create something that can actually be deployed. So you want to create something that is going to look like this, where it's like this is a Python function of some kind, and then it's gonna do this training, or it's gonna run a question on your model that you created, right? So what I've found is a huge challenge there that's important is having consistent environment, meaning the requirements. If you're in a Python requirement, requirements.text, requirements.in, compile that. You want to figure out how to create a different consistent environment between the two. And again, I'm not going to go into detail about that, but it's just important, because how do you know, just because it works over here in Jupyter, how do you know it's going to work over there? What I did is I created a script that can run in Jupyter and install all of my requirements. And then I use that same script over here and install all the same exact requirements pinned to the version. That was called setup notebook.py. How are training? Okay, so then once you get to the point where you're training or you're fine tuning a language model, there's the question of like, how long is it going to take? We haven't talked about the time domain. I just talked about how it's complicated and you don't have as fancy of a machine as OpenAI. Well, there's the time domain. So if you have an entire year to train something and that computer's not going to fail, maybe it doesn't matter, but usually you want something to train in like an hour or 2 hours or a weekend or something. So there's something called tensor boards that get used to monitor the training process and what's going on and how close is the model getting to its benchmark accuracy over time. So tensor boards would be something to look up. How good is your training doing? That's what you look into is tensor boards. And there's all sorts of kinds of tensor board vendors and out there. What's that one called? Weights and biases. Yeah, weights and biases is a tensor board type vendor you could look at if you are using Colab. And then I put together a math formalization that talks about like the goal of that talks about the goal of quantization and training, and just kind of go through the whole talk I just gave you, but kind of like I tried to describe it in math because I thought this was going to require some kind of like math here, but I guess I don't have to really go through this. I can just kind of give you that and you could look at it if you want and make some comments and yell at me on GitHub if you want. That would be great. Or I don't know. I guess I could run through it if folks wanted to, but it's kind of hard to make a mathematical formalization like entertaining. So I think that was, yeah. I guess what it all kind of amounted to, and I didn't put this in the draft, but you're trying to create this kind of gamma. Trying to create this gamma that's a function of you're trying to create a gamma which is like a pleasing output, right? You're trying to create a pleasing output based upon these inputs of you only have so much time and so many resources. And so, you know, that's kind of what the whole formalization gets to. So I guess this is the one equation I'll show is that gamma is you're really like the goal of fine tuning is to create pleasing output that some human is going to say, yeah, this is an awesome app for this segment of people. And yeah, so that's you can do that with open source language models. Okay, I talked about scaling as well. You might be doing a hobby project. If you like what I'm talking about here, you might try to do something like this at home. But then eventually you might want to scale this, or you might be hired somewhere and they say, we need to do what you did in a hobby. We need to scale this somehow. There's bigger servers that can be purchased if you have a sufficient budget, if the company is willing to. And that's where I think you get into the pre-configured tech stack to get around the problems I had talked about earlier on these slides. So you don't have to necessarily deal with all this crap getting up and running. And then if there is a way to sort of do this that I did for my company, where you have a way to set up environments consistently, if they have that might even be better because it takes a significant amount of time. Oops. Yeah, just getting consistent environments is important. Having a pre-configured tech stack if possible. And yeah, and then other than that, I just wanted to say again, I think we're going to see the same pattern again, where somebody's going to say, we need a better output, we need a better LLM of some kind. We need to train it. Okay, that means we need a GUI. All right, we need now that we need a GUI, we need to do all this stuff. That means we need some consistent tooling to make sure it's all going to work in both the GUI environment over here in this app and the Jupyter notebook in your research environment, right? So that's kind of everything I wanted to talk about. I'm not sure how much time we have. Am I doing okay?
Yeah, we have like even 10 more minutes. You can move to talk about personal experiences.
Okay, we have 10 minutes, or what time do we go until?
So 10 minutes for the talk, and then even 10 more minutes for questions, and then will be personal discussion.
So we have like 20 more minutes basically in total, right? Okay, cool. So yeah, so that's the open source language model talk. I could talk a little bit more about myself if people still wanted to, but maybe I should just pause there to see if anybody had any questions on this part of the talk first. And then I can talk about myself a little bit more and, you know, my philosophy on like your career and entrepreneurship and stuff. Yeah.
I had a question about like the leaderboard evaluating the language models of like, are they evaluating for like accuracy of asking questions or like quality of how much the text sounds like a real person? Because I feel like generative models are hard to evaluate because you're not like you don't have a right answer to compare to usually.
Yeah, it's a great question. So let's see here. There's a couple different ways. There's a couple different philosophies I've seen. There's one called an ELO score. So an ELO score, let me just pull this up here. An ELO score came from the world of gaming, and an ELO score is sort of like more opinion based. Like you have two things and you rank them and you say which one is better. And so I think this is an ELO score ranking. Yeah, so this is ranking LLMs with the ELO ranking system, where they where you basically, there's like an app where you literally ask a question and then it gives you two outputs. It doesn't tell you where it came from and you say which one is better. So actually there might be this app right here, chatbot. Let's see if we can pull it up. I don't know if it's open anymore, but it's, yeah, this is what it looks like, right? It gives you two different options and you say A is better, B is better, tie, or both are bad. And then they ranked all these different models. And so I'd say this is more opinion-based. And what's interesting about this is you've got, and this is always kind of changing, but here you have an Apache 2.0 license, that's an open source license, and you have the Starling LM 7 billion parameter beta. So that's pretty interesting because I haven't seen this before. This is like a pretty small language model, and it's pretty high up there, right? Compared to Gemini Pro, ChatGPT 4, having a 1251 ELO score versus 1127, then goes down pretty far. So so that's one way, but then what I had shown on the slide are kind of more like standard scoring. Let's see here. Hugging face, open LM leaderboard. This is more, these metrics are more like, so if you look at MMLU is one type of leaderboard where it's a set of questions that are from like academic and scientific questions and answers. And you can use that to train a language model. And then you go around and you ask the language model a sample of those questions. So there's like a training set and a test set. And if it gets the answers right, then it gets a higher score. And that's just one, and there's a bunch of them, right? So here they're just giving you the average score so there's a 72 billion parameter model that's the top right now. It has a score of 81. And the other thing to note is that usually these benchmarks have a human rating, so like how well does a human do? And you can benchmark based off of a human as well. So this is the MLU leaderboard overall and a description of what it is. And you can Google any of those, any of these to better understand what they're getting at. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Other questions about the open source language model?
How do you make money off of open source language models?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so there's like 4 ways to make money that I like to talk about based on the directions of the compass. I would say the north wind direction is like you're saving money. You're saving money on something. The south wind is you're creating additional revenue. The west wind is some kind of risk, like risk mitigation. So you're just stopping revenue streams from stopping, and then the east wind could be insurance, like by law, you're providing risk mitigation and a payout. So with open source language models, you'd have to look at the business case behind the business that's putting like their open source language project together, right? So if you are selling to one of the, let's see, if you're selling to like a healthcare organization, we talked about these in the beginning here. Selling to like a healthcare organization, they may not be able to use the closed source language model at all because of HIPAA regulations. So that you might consider that like a south wind type of opportunity because it's like a revenue source. If you can create a HIPAA protected open source like app that you are then that you are creating for this healthcare organization, that's revenue that wouldn't exist otherwise. So that's why I say it's like a south wind, like revenue generating opportunity. Now, on the other hand, let's say there's some like, I don't know, factory that has a bunch of queries about how to create like a worldwide factory that makes all these different things. They have a bunch of queries coming into a central office and they have like, let's say their internal like customer service for factories. And they want a chat bot to make that process more efficient or to triage questions. But they don't want to use they don't want to use, ChatGPT because for sensitivity reasons, they don't want ChatGPT getting that data. This might be a farcical example, but they would be employing an open source language model, and this, if they chose to do that, to save money, right? Because otherwise they're spending money on people triaging those questions. And really the starting triage. So like I noticed, has anybody heard of DigiKey?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I noticed DigiKey they use a chat, they've used chat for their help service for a long time. And I noticed like recently, let's see here, yeah, chat. So it used to be they would connect you with a person right away. And now they seem to triage you with a chat bot, and it says powered by eGain. So you go to eGain. So eGain might be just using Chat GPT under the hood. I'd have to read up more on this, but they're doing what I described here. And actually, this doesn't even seem to be an LLM. It seems to be more of like a tree-based chatbot. I'm clicking. Yeah, so they might not actually be an LLM, but like they're using a chat bot of some kind, not necessarily an LLM, and they're triaging these customer service questions. And or it might be a combination of like a branching logic-based thing, and then one of them is an LLM. I think Carvana as well does something like that. Let's see, just double check. They still have that. I don't see it. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so they have this, yeah, ask anything, okay? What's a cool car? Yeah, Sebastian. So the I don't know what to expect here. Porsche 911, okay, cool. All right, yeah. Not a car person, but they, okay. But this would be, so let's say they're using an open LLM, then that might be a revenue generating one because you're helping triage customers, actual customers, same with DigiKey. If it's more of an internal thing, it might be more of like revenue saving. Or it might be kind of both.
So if someone's like a customer that wants to use one of these OpenAIs, like they don't pay for it, right? Because it's open.
You don't pay for it, but you have to pay for your machine
Sure.
to run it.
So what kind of like licenses I mean, is it similar licensing for like open source just software?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, well, the one I saw over here was Apache 2.0, right? So I know I've seen that. I don't know the details of it right offhand. Oh. So you just search Apache, and then they're gonna have the terms and definitions on here that describe what that license is. There's also like MIT licensed software. There's a lot of different licenses, and I guess you got to look at the license that is listed. And then let's see. I don't know if that other leaderboard I showed you has licenses attached to the, to the leaderboard. Well, I don't know why it's not even pulling up at all here, but yeah, you just have to look into what the license is for the language model in question. Other questions?
Yeah, doesn't using open source models induce more risk to some corporations using them, especially for mission critical applications like healthcare perhaps? Because like if your model is on the internet, then people can, really do lots of like GAN testing or things like that to figure out how to exactly hijack these models and make them not work or do, adverse behaviors.
Oh man, that's a great question. Yeah, so that is a huge issue, and I think there was the most recent high profile issue that comes to mind was some airline ended up giving a bunch of free tickets to people who did something like that. I don't know if you saw that. So yeah, it is a huge risk, and yes, and I probably should have added this into my presentation. I just haven't worked on this yet, but yeah, like we're not just like LLMs are not the be all end all. It's really probably LLMs plus another thing. Because I've heard a lot of skepticism about LLMs and AI. So I'm very much a skeptic at heart. And last year there was a huge amount of like overexcitement about how smart these things are. And people saying, oh, they're gonna replace all of our jobs. And it's like, if you look at just the LLM, there's a lot of mistakes and problems that occur. And so that suggests that they will not replace a lot of jobs, which is probably a good forecast. But on the other hand, if it's an LLM plus other software that's good, that either gives good guardrails or good outputs or good functionality, that's the thing that's the key, right? It's not just the LLM. I don't personally, it's my opinion, I don't think LLMs are gonna solve the world's problems on their own. I think it's people fine tuning them and then putting them into other applications with other software that have really good functionality. So I'm really glad you asked that, because it is true. Don't just let these things go on their own. I think a lot of people did that. I've been doing that. We did that last year, and with pretty hilarious results. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. How much time we have for career discussion? Any?
For discussion, you have a lot of time once there are no questions here, and then it's in a smaller group. Yeah, unless
We can do that after the presentation, yeah.
yeah, and yeah. So let me just be sure, can you review a little bit the current efforts in OpenLLM? Like all the main players?
I actually don't know that super well. I know that yeah, my boss has been paying attention to that a lot more closely than me. And I've been just working a lot on implementation. I know that the most recent one was Mixtral in Paris. Mistral or Mixtral? They were the big ones that came out in December that made a huge splash. So they're a let's see here.
I think it's Mistral.
Mistral, yeah. So this company, Mistral AI, based in Paris, is all about, they've got a 7 billion parameter LLM that was at the top of it was not towards the top of the ELO board. Now it looks like the ELO board is completely changed since then, but back in December, I was like, oh my gosh, they were like number 7 and had the Apache 2.0 license, I think. And so I think I don't know if the excitement around them has died off, but I would look into them. And then I would also look at what the heck is that Starlings. I would just look at the ELO. I would look at the OpenLLM leaderboard. I'm not sure why this has crashed. And I would look at the LLM sys chatbot arena leaderboard, and then try to figure out which ones are open source. Okay, yeah, here's the one that was, it's now 17, that was like pretty high up and back in December.
But also in 10, you have Mistral, right?
10 is that that's Mistral
the
Medium, but
proprietary.
that one is proprietary, so that seems to be their proprietary one, right? But then Nexus Flow, who's that Nexus Flow? I've never heard. But things are changing and moving so quickly that if I give an answer right now, this is being recorded, like just the next week, it's gonna be totally different. So you gotta just watch these leaderboards, that LLM sys one. But yeah, who's Nexus? Yeah, if I say anything about Nexus right now, and then somebody sees this video a month from now, it might sound completely stupid, so I'm not gonna say anything.
Okay,
So is it easy to like download one of these models from Hugging Face and then like train it more? You know, to like improve it?
Yeah, that's what fine tuning is. That's what fine tuning. I mean, okay, so there is base training as well, which I don't understand as much, but I understand that. Yeah, you go on Hugging Face and there's all sorts of like tutorials on different kinds of maps. So like, let's take Falcon B. This is one this is Falcon Refined Web 1B from this is United Arab Emirates Technology Institute. Spent millions of dollars on AWS credits to build this. And well, actually they built a 72 billion parameter model, which was like the #1 model back in June last year. And so this was popular for a while. You can see also the downloads per month. There was a huge spike for a while and then it's kind of died off because other models have probably surpassed it. But let's see, so the files, literally like this is the binary that you need, and then you need the tokenizer, you need the config file, like you need just a few key files. And then if you go here onto the homepage for my talk, I did ask them to add, let's reload this, a link to my, I don't know where that went, or okay, it's reloading. Yeah, I added them they've added a link to my GitHub repo where I discussed a lot more of this at length for anybody who really wants to go into it. But I have some kind of pseudocode at the bottom that describes, it describes how to train a model using a LoRa method and a QLoRa method. So you could go down to some of that as kind of like hints, and you can go through my whole paper that I wrote for kind of to really lay everything out if you really want to get into it. And then you could contact me too. See if anybody really wants to build anything, like, yeah, contact me, I'll help you. And that goes for you too, online people. Any other questions?
Do you do much with distillation and trying to get like bigger models to, get the same results of a smaller model?
Distillation, okay, smaller model. Yeah, I am interested in that, but I haven't gotten to, that's a long, complex project. I think I'm very interested in that, but I haven't gotten to, that's a huge project, right? Like comparing all the results of this one and then figuring out how to benchmark that over time. But yeah, that's exactly, I mean, your train of thought is, you're on the right track. Yeah, that's a good point. Because a lot of what I've written here is kind of theoretical and hand waving. At the end of the day, like how good is something? Are you developing an ELO score or using benchmarks? And are you just comparing benchmarks to benchmarks, or did you create your own benchmark of some kind? But yeah, that's kind of the whole process. Is like you use a 1 billion parameter model to get the same or better outputs than a 3 billion parameter model. That'd be awesome, right? Any other questions?
So I think in terms of time, actually, it's a good time to actually, first of all, thank you.
Yep.
And before we have a discussion, you want to take a break, refresh or anything, or?
I'm okay if anybody
Okay.
else wants to take a break.
So actually, yeah, so Georgia, thank you. There's no need to continue reporting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.